Welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast, made for women who want their healthiest years to be ahead of them, not behind them. Join your host, Courtney Townley, right now as she breaks down the fairy tale health story you have been chasing all of your life into sensible action steps and lasting change. Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast. This is your host, Courtney Townley. Thank you so much for being here. I do not take your listenership lightly. I am deeply grateful for your time and your ears, and I promise to provide you a lot of value in this episode today. We are actually going to be talking about time today. The way that we think about time, our relationship with time, because I see this as a really big barrier for a lot of people in terms of how they want to be showing up for themselves. So I hope that sounds good to you. Before we go there, I want to remind those of you who maybe haven't been around for the past couple weeks that our theme on the Grace and Grit podcast this month is unrelenting ownership. What does it look like to take unrelenting ownership of your health journey and ultimately of your life? The reason I chose this theme in particular is because it's really at the heart of what I teach my clients and my students. So unrelenting ownership really means that you are committed to learning the skills and building the practices that will allow you to release the blame and release the excuses, become less reactive and so much more proactive in your process. It means you are fiercely committed to finding solutions to the challenges, the problems, the obstacles that will most surely show up along your journey. And it means that you are really willing to take a close look at the strategies you are using to create change in your life. And if the strategies aren't working, you don't marinate in judgment, but you're actually willing to really look at the strategy with curiosity, learn from your mistakes, and move forward more wisely. So you really consider how you could think differently, how you could communicate differently, how you could manage yourself differently in every scenario. And taking unrelenting ownership means that you're really committed to ending the habit of compromising, negotiating, and rationalizing your way out of the work that your life is calling you to do. In a nutshell, unrelenting ownership is taking full responsibility for how you show up along your health journey and for how you shape your life, regardless of what has happened in the past or what will happen in the future. So we started this conversation a couple of weeks ago with an episode called The Call to Own Your Worth. It was episode 212. And the reason we started there is because if you do not believe you are worthy of your own time, energy, and attention, you will never sustain the work that you want to commit to for very long. So in that episode, I did a really deep dive into what self-worth is, how you can fortify yours, and how you can actually stop hustling for your worth outside of yourself. And what I mean by that is a lot of women have built this habit of putting their worth in other people's hands. So they end up trying to earn their worth or prove their worth to the point that they don't even recognize themselves. And in a lot of cases, they don't even like themselves. And then in episode 213, which was the second episode in this theme, we talked about owning your possibility and what that looks like. Truth be told, for you to create new possibility for your life, you have to change the way you think about yourself and the way you think about what's possible for your life. You cannot create new possibility by allowing your past to define you. And so I challenged listeners in that episode to really consider how what they believe about themselves and what they believe about their future may be the very thing that's standing in the way of them showing up to do the things that need to be done. So if either of those episodes sound like they're relevant to you, which I would argue they're relevant to everybody. I've never met a person who couldn't use some reminders in these areas. I certainly need them all the time. I would really encourage you to go back and check those out. And today we're going to continue this exploration of unrelenting ownership with the conversation around owning your time. I think that our relationship with time can be truly one of the biggest barriers that you will face in creating what you want for your life. And we've all heard that quote, actions are more powerful than words. You can say that you want something for your life. I want to improve my health. I want to eat better. I want to, improve my relationship with exercise. I want to improve my relationships with other people. I want to make more time for my passions and pursuits. But if you don't actually reserve time in the day for those things, and better yet, show up for the time that you reserve, you're really just talking, right? It's just words without action. I've reminded listeners of this quote 1,000 times, but Stephen Covey has said that, don't tell me what's important to you. Show me what's on your calendar. And I would take that even a step further and tell me what you did today. Because I know a lot of women who will put it on their calendar, but then not follow through, not actually show up. So what did you actually do today? How did you actually spend your time? And is that in alignment with what you say you want for your life? If you're anything like most people I coach, it's not. And that's why you're really so uncomfortable and you're struggling and you feel stuck. So something I want you to consider is that time is truly your most valuable asset. Because you can't go out and make more of it. It's way more valuable than money because you can always make more money, right? You can, in most cases, you can go out your front door and breathe more air. I know that's a hard one for some of you to conceptualize right now because it's so smoky in the Northwest right now, certainly where I live, and I know a lot of you live. But the reality is we can go out and get more of those things. But we can't go out and get more time. And your results will be largely dependent. The results of your life will be largely dependent on how you choose to spend the time that you have. And ladies, you know that you're spending a lot of time either on things that aren't that important to you or things that aren't really important to what you want ultimately for your life. And this is where I talk about, the passive versus massive action. Passive action is kind of, reading about health and wellness, but not actually doing anything with that knowledge. It's, listening to a podcast about whatever, how to improve relationships or finances or how to cook healthier, but never actually showing up to practice those things. The practice is what changes your life. The knowledge without application is totally meaningless, totally unuseful. It just takes up bandwidth in your brain, but most certainly does not change your life. So the first step is we need to get really honest about our relationship with time. And that starts with awareness. And I always say this, awareness is not always a feel-good activity. In fact, awareness often feels hard because you're literally standing face to face with things that you may not be doing well. And that isn't necessarily a fun exercise, but it's so important to the change process. You can't skip it. And here's something, if you're somebody who really has a hard time standing face to face with the truth of your life, remind yourself that when you know yourself better, you can lead yourself better. And that's really what unrelenting ownership is all about. It's about self-leadership. It's about directing yourself in a way that makes you feel really good when you put your head on the pillow at night. So awareness about time we could start with just getting some clarity around how we think about time. So literally, just ask yourself the question, how do I think about time? What are some of the things that I always say to myself about time? And write it down. Do a thought download, do a brain dump on a piece of paper, and just see what comes out. It will undoubtedly be a lot of thoughts. And I would even go further and say it's going to be a lot of thought errors. And what do I mean by a thought error? I mean, it's a way of thinking that's not actually making your life better. It's making your life harder. And so it's kind of a faulty thought. It's not a thought that's serving you, so why would you continue to think it? So what are some of the really common thought errors that people have about time? Well, we say things to ourselves like, there's never enough time. It takes so much time. I don't have time. And what's so important for you to remember about these thoughts, more specifically these thought errors, is that your brain loves to prove itself right. Your brain is really good at proving itself right. So when you say something like, I just don't have time, your brain is going to go to work looking for all the evidence to prove that thought true. And evidence you will find. Lots of it. So what kind of evidence do you want your brain looking for is the better question. Because I don't want my brain looking for all the reasons why I can't do something. I want my brain going to work looking for all the evidence for why I can. So let's just take something like exercise, which for a lot of women is an I don't have time. I don't have time thought comes up a lot when we think of exercise. I don't have time today. And let's just say that we put it on our calendar, right? So we put it on our calendar for today at 2:00. And as we approach 2:00, we are recycling this thought over and over again, whether it's conscious or not. I don't have time. There's too much to do. Something else is more important. And when I just even think the one thought, even though there's lots of thoughts, if I just break it down to the thought about time, I don't have time today. I don't have time to exercise. My brain is going to look for all the reasons that's true. And when I say it, I don't have time, how do I feel? Well, immediately when I say I don't have time, I feel a little bit panicked. Maybe it brings up a different emotion for you, but that's what it brings up for me is I feel panicked when I tell myself I don't have time. And when I panic, I do a couple of things. Number one, I start spending a lot of time spinning out in my head about all the things I have to get done and why they're not going to get done and just big storylines about what it means that I don't have time. So I actually waste a lot of time. The other thing I do when I panic is I make mistakes. So my work actually takes me longer. And I most definitely don't take action, especially not with something like exercise. If I tell myself I don't have time for it, I'm not going to show up for it. And that is the result that I create, is that I prove to myself I don't have time. And that sucks, because my real want is that I make time daily to move my body. So it goes completely against the grain of what I truly want to create for myself. Another really common thought error that we don't often think of as an error is I need to manage my time better. But really, if you think about it, you can't manage time. Like, time is always marching on, regardless of what you do. It's always there. It's always consistent. What is a more true statement is that I need to manage my mind. I need to manage my thoughts about time. Because how you want to think about time, or how you do think about time, has everything to do with how you will spend your time. So it would be a very useful exercise for you, maybe right now, maybe later today, to take 3 minutes to write down some of your thoughts about time. Like, what are some of the things you catch yourself saying in regards to time all the time? And maybe these aren't even things you just say in your head. Maybe these are things that you actually say out loud. And just ask yourself, when I say those things, how do I show up? What do I ask my brain to look for evidence for? And do I like that? Do I like my brain looking for evidence for that? And if I don't like it, I'm going to ask it to look for evidence for something else, right? It is possible for me to say, how might I create time? I have time. How do I need to organize myself to make the most of it? Completely different thought, completely different energy, completely different emotions, and different actions will come out of that than thinking something like, I don't have time. I'm hosting a free online masterclass on September 22nd, 24th, and 26th, and I would love for you to come. It's called Women's Health Reimagined. You know, diets don't teach you about self-trust. In fact, the diet industry banks on you lacking it. I talk a lot with my community and on this podcast about health being a practice of self-leadership. And to lead yourself in a powerful way, you've got to learn how to trust yourself in a powerful way. Trust yourself to do what you said you would do. Trust yourself to have your own back no matter how badly you screw up. Trust yourself to stop assuming your mistakes mean that there's something wrong with you. Self-trust is a very big deal when it comes to your health. In fact, I would argue that it's a more powerful superfood than most actual superfoods being sold to you. If you're listening to this and you feel like I'm talking to you, maybe it's time to stop forking over your precious time and energy to yet another diet program and just come to my masterclass. You can register by going to graceandgrit.com/reimagine. Once again, that's graceandgrit.com/reimagine. I really hope I'll see you there. Another really important thing that will help you to get honest about your relationship with time is tracking your time. Collect data. I always say data over drama. Just tell me what the data is, and I will tell you how you spend your time. Because we tell ourselves a lot of stories about what we think is happening. Get rid of the assumptions, get rid of the storylines, and just look at the data. Data is not personal. It's just data. So how do you go about tracking your time? It's tedious, I will tell you that. Like, if you go through an entire day of tracking how you spend your time, it's going to be a little bit tedious because you're literally tracking how you're spending every minute of the day. But if you did it for one day, you would learn a lot about yourself. So one of the apps that I encourage people to use for this is called Toggl, Toggl. It's an app that literally you can track your time throughout the day. And maybe you just want to toggle your time around one activity, like how you're spending your time at work, or how much time you're spending on social media, or how much time you are spending beating yourself up about not making a healthy dinner or not exercising. I mean, there's all kinds of things that you could specifically toggle your time around that would make it a little bit less tedious. But the reason I like kind of getting an overview of your entire day is because it really helps you to get clear on how you're spending your time. And then the next part of that is you get to ask yourself, is the way I'm spending my time in line with my priorities, with what I say is important in my life? And I'll tell you that a lot of women haven't even really gotten clear with themselves about what their priorities actually are. So it's hard to do that if you don't already know what your priority filter is. So what is a priority filter? A priority filter is really listing the 3 to 5 most important things that you want to spend time on in your day. And these are constant. These aren't changing wildly every day. The amount of time you spend on them might be changing, but your priorities are pretty consistent. And I say limit it to 3 to 5 because if you have a lot more priorities than that, it's going to get very gray, right? And you're going to start to overwhelm yourself. So really try to constrain yourself to just 3 to 5 main priorities. What are your time priorities? Where do you want to be spending the bulk of your time? And then the filter comes in by ordering those things in order of 1 to 5. What do you want to be spending the most time on? What's the most important thing? What's the second? What's the third? If you have 4th and 5th, add those too. But then you can take the day that you have toggled or you have tracked and really compare to your priority filter. Is how I'm spending my time in alignment with what I say my priorities are? And often the answer will be no. Right? I mean, this is really where so much of that integrity pain comes from. Integrity pain is when we're not aligning our actions with what we say we want for our life. And it's just a very deep discomfort within us, right? It's almost like a boiling frustration because we are doing a lot of things in the day. It's not that we're sitting on our butt. Yet the things that we're doing aren't really in line with how we want to be living. And that creates a lot of pain, emotional pain for us. So, when you're reconciling how you spent your day with your priorities, some of the things you want to look for are time wasters versus time warriors. This is something that I teach inside of my Consistency Code program. A time waster isn't just like spending needless time on social media, or I don't know, maybe you spend a lot of time watching a Netflix series. Those are really obvious time wasters. Now, what makes it a waster is the reason behind it. If you're watching a Netflix series because you've been really sick for a few days and you've been stressed to the hilt, and this is actually a choice you're making to decompress, I would argue that maybe isn't a time waster. But if you're watching a Netflix series because you're avoiding a project or you're avoiding spending time with somebody, I would say that that needs to be reconsidered. But the less obvious time wasters are things like worrying a lot. We spend a lot of time worrying about what could happen. We spend a lot of time buffering, watching Netflix when really we should be in the kitchen cooking dinner, right? Because we say we want to eat healthier and that's a priority for us. A time waster is people pleasing. right? People pleasing, like really working to please other people, is a time waster. Indecision, not deciding about something. Oh my gosh, can you waste a lot of time there? Staying in a state of confusion, judging yourself, having a lot of regret, spinning out in a state of overwhelm or perfectionism. Those are all time wasters because they're not actually getting you anything. Not anything that feels true and authentic and real. Versus a time warrior. What are the things that you spend time on that actually do feel totally in alignment with what you want? Things that you spend time on that actually move you in the direction that you want to go. These would be things like making decisions strongly, taking massive action that counts. So that's the application of the things that you're learning. You spend time organizing your time to make sure you're spending your time in a way that feels really like a good fit for how you want to be spending it. You practice constraint. So, it's like a kid going into life is kind of like a kid going into a candy store. There's so much opportunity to do so many things. But when you try to do everything, you end up doing nothing. Like you don't really do anything with any kind of meaningful effort. So we have to practice a little bit of constraint. We have to practice saying no. I would say that's a time warrior, learning how to say no to things. And really allowing ourselves to not always do like A+ work, which is a really hard one for me. But I can spend days just trying to create a podcast, right? I used to do this early on in my podcasting days. I would re-record because it wasn't perfect. Holy cow, was that a waste of time? Because you know what? Some of the most commentary and interaction I've had on the podcast has been from the episodes that I would rate at maybe a C+. It wasn't my best work. I didn't think it was my best work, but it resonated. It did the job. It helped people. That's all that matters. So how much time are you wasting thinking that you have to do everything perfectly or at, sort of that A level? And here's the thing I want you to understand. Tracking your time and really comparing how you're spending your time with your priorities is not a one-time exercise. It's something that you need to do over and over and over again throughout your life to make sure that you're traveling in the direction you said you wanted to go. So the other piece of improving our relationship with time, of course, is organizing ourselves and how we're spending our time. And to me, organization is really deciding what's most important to spend time on, committing to those things, and planning. Having a strategy for how you're going to get those things done. So a few tips I have for you around organizing your time in the day. I do find it a very helpful practice, and I teach my students this, to have a time in the week where you kind of do a global overview of the week ahead. You really look ahead into the next 5 or 7 days to ask yourself, how can I organize myself to be able to show up in the way that I want to over the course of the next week? And then I also think it's really important to have a practice of looking at your schedule daily and fine-tuning it as needed. So there's kind of the weekly overview and then the daily organization. The other tip I would give you around organization is you have to be willing to experiment. I mean, how many times have you bought a planner that you thought was going to be the planner that got your life together? And then you used it for a month and then you never used it again. Or you started, you committed to exercising in the morning at, let's just say 6:30 in the morning every day, but a couple weeks in and you're not really showing up. You have to be willing. Unrelenting ownership is that willingness to rework the strategy. to try a different way of organizing yourself. Maybe you try exercising at a different time of the day to see if that isn't an easier time for you to follow through with. But be willing to experiment to find what works for you. I would also say, as my husband always says, eat the frog. So whatever whatever activity you are least excited about in the day, try to do it in a time of the day where you have more bandwidth. So for me, anything after 4:00 is pretty much, I know myself well enough to know that it needs to be easy. If I need to organize a new masterclass for my membership site or record a podcast, doing it at night is not a good idea because I'm going to waste a lot of time. So I tend to do those things early in the day where I have the most energy and mental fortitude. So what things in your schedule might you need to put earlier so you have more energy and fortitude to put towards it? The other thing that I really encourage my students to do with organizing their time is practice putting in your white space first. What the heck does that mean? White space is space in your day where you don't have a plan. You don't have anything to do. Or you will decide what you're going to do at that time when you arrive. It's going to be something for yourself. You're going to read a book. You're going to take a walk. You're going to call a friend. Maybe you're not going to do anything but sit and drink a cup of tea and stare out the window. But white space is so healthy and it's so important. If you're a parent or you've ever taken care of kids, you know how important it is for them to actually be bored. Like my kid, oh my word, he'll get bored and, he'll want to, of course, like most kids this day and age, watch TV or play a video game, which we are very strict about in our household. So we let him be bored. We don't let him engage with those things. And the coolest things happen, right? He builds a fort, or he starts to color or draw something, or I can hear him downstairs, having an entire dialogue with himself. But creativity is born in those moments. And ladies, we're living life at such a fast pace and jamming so much into our calendars that we're not creating that white space. So put your white space first. Maybe it's just 15 minutes a day. Maybe if you look at your week ahead, you could carve out 2 hours of white space on a Saturday afternoon. Again, be willing to experiment, but put that in your calendar before anything else goes in. Don't let your white space be an afterthought, because you know what happens in that case. You never have it. The other thing I would say about organizing yourself around time is practice constraint. You have to practice saying yes to the thing that is most important to you and learn how to say no to the things that aren't. And again, I'm like my husband always jokes, you're like a raccoon. You have shiny object syndrome. Everything excites you, and it does. And because everything excites me, I can really waste a lot of time on things that aren't really that important to what I say I want for my life. So I have to practice constraint to make sure that I am dedicating my most precious time and energy to the things that are most precious to me. And be realistic, right? You only have so much bandwidth, so much energy, so much time in the day. And so how do you want to be spending it? Don't tell yourself you can do everything, that you can put 10,000 things on your to-do list. In fact, I would argue that when you write your calendar, when you write your daily plan for the day, err on the side of making yourself uncomfortable because you feel like it's not enough. That's a great exercise for people to lean into. So the final piece I want to talk about in terms of improving relationship with time today is learning how to coach yourself around time. And what I mean about that is when you start to, first of all, have awareness of the way you talk about time, and then you look at how you're spending your time, And then you organize your time in a way that is in line with your priorities. The next piece is learning how to show up to do the things that you said you would do. And that is where self-coaching comes in. And this is really the heart of what I teach my students, how to coach themselves to show up to do the things they said were most important to them. So once you organize your day, you get to watch your mind go crazy in terms of all the rationalizing and negotiating and compromising it's going to try to do to talk its way out of doing the work. And remember, that lizard part of your brain, the oldest part of your brain, the amygdala, it doesn't want to work hard. It wants pleasure, avoid pain, least amount of effort. So when you're leaning into work, of course you're not going to want to do it. So you have to manage your mind in such a way that you will show up to do the work. And you also need to learn how to manage your emotions in such a way that you are willing to feel uncomfortable. A lot of times we aren't showing up because we aren't willing to feel difficult things. And that's a massive problem because the change process, shaping a life that is really meaningful to you, is going to require that you are willing to feel difficult emotions. So what tools do you have for managing your emotions, for managing your thinking, for following through with what you said you would do? And if you don't have tools, it is so worth the time, energy, investment of going out and finding that help. And so I've already mentioned this on the podcast today, but the masterclass that I am teaching next week, so I don't know when you're going to be listening to this podcast, but for those of you who actually listen to it every week, it's happening September 22nd, 24th, and 26th. And it's called Women's Health Reimagined. And in this masterclass, I am literally talking you through the pathway that I teach my students in terms of how I teach them thought management work, emotional management work, and how to show up to do the things they said they would do for themselves. So if that is something that you think you would benefit from, and quite frankly, I don't know a woman who wouldn't benefit because these are things, again, I remind myself of all the time, I would really encourage you to come. You know, we're taught that health is an outcome. We're taught that it's a weight on the scale, the way that we look in our clothes, a level of leanness. But ladies, it's so much more than that, right? Our reasons for doing what we do are really what we want to get straight about. You can hate your way to a lower number on the scale. You can rock a bikini and still not like yourself. You can exercise yourself to a level of leanness as a distraction from parts of your life that just feel too hard to face. Health is not an outcome. It is an ongoing process of being radically honest with yourself about why you do what you do and developing yourself to make sure you like your reasons. And the way that I always talk about health and improving your health is that it's an exercise in self-leadership. So if you are ready to step away from diet culture and really step up your ability to lead yourself in the health arena and beyond, do not miss this masterclass. You can register for it by going to graceandgrit.com/reimagine. Once again, that's graceandgrit.com/reimagine. I'm super excited about it, and I really hope I will see you there. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Grace and Grit podcast. It is time to mend the fabric of the female health story, and it starts with you taking radical responsibility for your own self-care. You are worth the effort, and with a little grace and grit, anything is possible.